Captain Jake stood on the edge of the crystal canyon and looked down. The morning light turned everything golden and sharp. Below him, the rocks cut upward like broken teeth, and between them he could see something that did not belong. A ship. An alien ship. It lay twisted in the canyon like a wounded animal. Jake pressed his hand to his communication device. His team waited 2 kilometers away, taking samples of the strange mineral dust that filled the air on this planet. They did not know he had wandered this far. He knew he should call them now. Protocol said report first, investigate second. Jake had followed protocol for 15 years in the human space fleet. 15 years of following orders, staying safe, doing things the right way. He started down the canyon wall. The ship was not human. That became clear the moment Jake got close enough to see it properly. The metal was a dark purple color that seemed to drink the light instead of reflecting it. The shape was wrong too. Where human ships were built to be strong and simple, this one had curves and angles that made no sense. Ship. The design matched the database. Jake knew they were not friendly. They did not negotiate. They did not compromise. When ships appeared, human stations went a high alert. Jake knew this, and he climbed into the wreckage anyway. The air inside the ship was bad. Toxic minerals from the planet had gotten inside through a massive hole in the hull. Jake activated his suit's air recycler and moved deeper into the ship. The corridors were dark and twisted. Bodies lay in some of them. Bodies. Jake did not stop to count them. They were past helping. But then, in a sealed chamber near the center of the ship, he heard something. A sound, a clicking sound, frightened and small. Jake pushed at the metal door. It was jammed. He worked at it for 5 minutes using tools from his emergency kit. The clicking got louder. More clicking joined in. 3 voices clicking and chirping like terrified insects. When the door finally opened, Jake saw them. 3 young. They were smaller than adult, maybe half the size. Their exoskeletons were pale, not the dark color of adult. Their eyes were big and round, and right now those eyes were looking at Jake with pure terror. They backed away from him, clicking faster and faster. They pressed against the back wall of the chamber, clustering together like they might disappear if they pushed hard enough. Jake slowly raised his hands, keeping them open and visible. He did not know if understood body language. He did not know anything about young except that they should not exist anywhere near human space. But here they were, 3 of them, alone and injured and dying. The smallest one of the 3 was missing part of its front leg. Another had a deep cut across its upper shell that had stopped bleeding but looked infected. The third one seemed less injured but was shaking badly, its whole body moving in and out with quick, panicked breathing. Jake spoke in a soft voice, knowing they could not understand his words, but hopping the tone might help. He kept his movement slow. He backed away slightly, giving them space. The smallest one stopped clicking for a moment, just for a moment, and looked at Jake with something that might have been curiosity. But then fear took over again, and all 3 young ones screeched in unison. The sound was sharp and painful in Jake's ears even through his suit. He pulled his hand away from his communication device. If he called his team now, they would come. They would see 3 young, and protocol said that were hostile. Protocol said that contact with young meant threat assessment. Threat assessment usually meant weapons. Jake knew what would happen. It had happened before, back on Station 12. A small scout had been spotted near the outer hull. They had blown it out of the sky before it could even transmit a message. The official report said it was self-defense. No one had mentioned that they might have been running from something. No one had asked why. Jake reached into his emergency kit and pulled out a medical scanner. The young did not understand what it was, but at least it was not a weapon. He held it up, showing it to them. Then he slowly scanned the injured one. The device beeped softly, and the reading told him what he already knew. The cut was infected. If the wound did not get cleaned and treated soon, the infection would spread. The young would die. The temperature inside the chamber was also wrong. Jake checked his instrument readings. It was too hot for their biology required cooler temperatures than human comfort zones. The young ones were probably suffering from heat stress on top of everything else. Jake made a choice. It was not a choice that followed protocol. It was not a choice that made strategic sense. It was simply the only choice he could live with. He went back to his suit's emergency supply compartment and pulled out his cooling pack, the one designed for emergency medical use. He set it down on the floor and stepped back. The young stared at it. The temperature around them dropped slightly. The smallest one stopped shaking as hard. It was a very small thing, but it was something. Over the next hour, Jake worked slowly and carefully. He showed them he had food. Not food for which he did not have, but he showed them the containers anyway. He demonstrated that he was not a threat by sitting down and turning away from them, making himself small. Gradually, very gradually, the fear in their clicking calls became less sharp. By the time he finally touched the injured one, it did not try to bite him. It did not attack. It simply held still while Jake cleaned the wound with medical gel and wrapped it with sterile bandage. The infection was bad but not hopeless, not if the young one received proper treatment. Jake knew his team would be looking for him soon. He knew he had maybe an hour before they sent out a search signal. He looked at the three young, huddled together under the glow of his cooling pack. He looked at the infected wound he had just bandaged. He looked at the pale exoskeletons that told him these were young, these were vulnerable, these were innocent of whatever conflict existed between human and. He made another choice. Jake reached into his emergency kit and pulled out the long-range transmitter. He sent a message to his team, not a distress call, a simple message. He had found something on the far side of the canyon. He would be delayed. He would contact them before nightfall. Then he sealed the chamber door behind him as he stepped deeper into the ship. He had to find medical supplies. He had to find cooling systems that still worked. He had to keep these three young alive, and he had to do it without anyone else knowing. They would probably come looking for their young eventually, but for now, tonight, in this broken ship in the Crystal Canyon, these three frightened young ones belonged to Jake, and he was not going to let anything happen to them. 3 weeks passed. Jake had stopped counting the days. He counted hours now. Hours between feedings. Hours the cooling systems could run without drawing power from the ship's critical reserves. Hours until the young needed their medical treatments applied again. His team had returned to the ship looking for him on the second day. Jake had hidden the young ones in a lower chamber and met his team members at the cave entrance. He told them he had found a wreck, but it appeared empty. The scans showed radioactive damage, too dangerous to explore. They had believed him because Jake did not lie. He had never lied, until now. His team leader, Captain Hayes, had wanted to examine the ship anyway. But the radiation readings Jake had invented on his personal scanner looked convincing. Had ordered the area sealed for safety. They would return with a specialized team in a few weeks, he said. Jake had watched them leave, and he had continued his work. The smallest, the one with the missing leg, had started to recover. The infection was clearing. The young one still moved awkwardly, still seemed to be in pain, but there was something different in how it looked at Jake now. Something less like fear and more like trust. The injured cut across the middle one's shell had healed cleanly. The third one, the largest, had simply needed water and food and cooler temperatures. All of that Jake could provide. They had learned to recognize his footsteps. When Jake entered their chamber, they no longer clicked in panic. They made smaller sounds. Greeting sounds, maybe. The smallest one would move toward him, dragging its broken leg. Jake would sit with it for hours, doing what he could with basic medical supplies. The other two would rest against his legs, their shells cool and smooth against his suit. But the resources were running out. The medical supplies would last maybe 2 more weeks. The emergency rations Jake had taken from his kit would last maybe 1 week more. The power system in the ship was degrading. Every day, the cooling systems worked a little less efficiently. Every day, Jake knew it was becoming less likely that he could keep them alive. He was not thinking about why he was doing this anymore. That question had stopped making sense sometime around day 7. He was doing it because the young ones were alive and they needed him, and that was enough reason. On the morning of day 21, Jake heard something that made his blood go cold. The communication system in his suit crackled. Not a voice, a signal, an automated beacon, a beacon coming from the wreckage above him. A rescue ship had found the crash. Jake went to the window of the lower chamber and looked up through the broken metal of the wreck. Above, in the sky, he could see a ship descending, a sleek military vessel. The design was clean and efficient and terrifying. A warship. The young ones sensed the change in him. They clicked nervously, picking up on his fear. Jake knelt down and ran his hands over them, trying to calm them even as his mind raced. He had hidden them for 3 weeks, but a rescue team would scan the wreck. They would find evidence of human presence. They would find the 3 young ones, and then they would find him. Jake had no weapons. He had no way to fight. He had only his knowledge of the ship and his desperate hope that whoever came looking would understand. That they would see 3 young who were alive and safe and cared for, and that this would matter more than the fact that a human had done the caring. It was a hope without much foundation. The rescue team arrived 6 hours later. Jake heard the transport ship land on the canyon floor above. He heard the sound of heavy boots moving through the wreck, methodical and military. He heard them calling out in the language, sounds that meant nothing to him but carried urgency and command. He took the 3 young ones to the main chamber, the one with the best light. He wanted them to be visible. He wanted whoever came down here to see them alive and healthy before anything else happened. The smallest one was still dragging its leg, but the wound was clean and healing well. The others stood beside Jake, their bodies close to his legs. When the military team entered the chamber, they stopped. There were 4 of them, all in combat armor. Their weapons were lowered but visible. One of them was taller than the others, with markings on her shell that indicated command. She stared at Jake. She stared at the 3 young ones, and Jake saw something change in her expression. But before she could speak, the 3 young ones moved. They did not attack. They did not hide. They moved toward Jake, pressing against him, their clicking sounds frantic and loud. The smallest one tried to climb onto Jake's leg, seeking protection and safety. The commander watched this. She lowered her weapon slowly. The other soldiers did the same. Then the commander stepped forward. She stopped a few meters away from Jake and the young ones. She said something in her language, her voice sharp but not hostile. Jake did not understand, but the 3 young ones calmed slightly at the sound of that voice. There was recognition there. They knew this. The commander switched to human speech. Her accent was heavy, but the words were clear. "You are human. You have touched my offspring." It was not a question. Jake forced himself to stand up straight. He kept his hands visible and non-threatening. The 3 young ones clung to him. They did not want to leave him, and that was obvious to everyone in the chamber. "I found them," Jake said quietly. "In the crash. They were dying. I kept them alive." The commander stared at him. Her exoskeleton was dark and polished, decorated with marks that must have meant something. Power, authority, rank. "You could have left them," the commander said. "I could have," Jake agreed, "but I didn't." The commander moved closer. One of her soldiers started to follow, but she raised a hand, stopping him. She came near enough that Jake could see every detail of her huge eyes, every marking on her shell. Behind her, he could see the 3 young ones watching her now. There was recognition, but there was also something else, something that looked like they were asking to stay. The commander touched the smallest one gently with one of her long arms. She felt the bandaging. She saw the care that had been taken with the wound. She looked back at Jake. "Why?" she asked, and there was something in her voice that had not been there before. Not anger, not gratitude, something else. Something that sounded like she was asking a question she had never thought to ask before. "Because they needed help," Jake said. "That is enough." The commander was silent for a long time. The 3 young ones had stopped trying to climb onto Jake now. They were looking at their mother, but they did not release their hold on his legs. Finally, the commander spoke to her soldiers in her own language. They lowered their weapons completely. One of them moved to the side. The commander gave an order, and a team member pulled up a medical scanner, checking the young ones for injuries. "You will come with us," the commander said to Jake. It was not a request. Jake nodded. He did not resist. He had known this moment would come. He had known from the beginning that he could not hide them forever. But as he was led away from the chamber, the three young ones clicked and called out to him. They tried to follow, and the commander had to stop them. They were terrified. They did not want to leave their human protector. And Jake, walking toward an uncertain future, could hear them calling his name in their alien language all the way to the transport ship. The Human Admiralty office on Station 12 was cold and official. Admiral sat behind a large desk, her fingers steepled together as she studied the report in front of her. Across from her sat Captain Jake in a simple chair, under guard, waiting to hear what his fate would be. The report was long. It detailed everything: the discovery of the wreck, the presence of three young, the human intervention, the 3 weeks of care and hiding. All of it was documented, analyzed, and now being judged. "You violated direct protocol," Admiral said, not looking up from the document. "You failed to report a hostile vessel. You concealed evidence from your team. You provided medical care to enemy combatants. You compromised mission security. This should result in immediate discharge from the service, possible charges of treason." Jake said nothing. He had known the consequences when he made his choices. He accepted them. Admiral finally looked up at him. However, the situation has become complicated. She turned a screen toward him. On it was a video message. A commander stood in the center of the image. Her shell was dark and polished, marked with the symbols of rank. Jake recognized her immediately. The mother, the one who had ordered him taken from the wreck. The Admiral pressed play. The commander's voice filled the room. "I am Commander Lyra of the Collective. I am communicating on behalf of my species regarding the human known as Jake. 3 weeks ago, this human discovered my offspring in a destroyed vessel. Instead of leaving them to die, as protocol would suggest, this human expended his own resources to maintain their lives. My offspring have been medically examined. Their condition is excellent. Without the intervention of this human, they would not have survived more than 2 additional cycles." The commander paused. In the background of her video, Jake could see the 3 young ones. They were healthy. They were moving normally. The smallest one was playing with something, its missing leg no longer causing obvious distress. "Among my species, such action is unusual," Commander Lyra continued. "We have been taught that other species act only in self-interest, that compassion exists only within family groups, that those outside the collective are not worthy of sacrifice. This human has proven these teachings to be false. He has demonstrated that compassion transcends species and genetic connection. My offspring no longer recognize caregivers. They call for this human. They sleep only when they can hear recordings of his voice. They have formed bonds with him that run deeper than normal parental connections." Jake felt something tighten in his chest. The 3 young ones had bonded with him. He had known this on some level, but hearing it stated so clearly, knowing it was enough to change the opinion of a commander, struck him deeply. "I offer the Human Admiralty an opportunity," Commander Lyra said. "Allow Jake to return to space, not as a prisoner but as a permanent resident and caregiver for my offspring. In exchange, they will cease all hostile actions in Sector 7. We will open diplomatic channels that have remained closed for 100 years. We will recognize the human species as worthy of respect and cooperation." The video ended. Admiral turned the screen back to herself. She studied Jake's face. They have never made such an offer. They have never shown interest in peace negotiations. In 30 seconds of video message, they changed human policy by offering us what we have been trying to achieve for 5 decades. "The young ones need him," Jake said quietly. The commander understood that. "The young ones," the admiral repeated. She shook her head slightly. "You realize what you are agreeing to. You would be leaving human space. You would be subject to law. You would have no backup, no human colony, no safety net. You would be the only human in territory. If something happened, if there was conflict or misunderstanding, we could not reach you." "I understand," Jake said. "And you would do this anyway." Jake thought of the three young ones, their shells cool against his legs. He thought of the smallest one, learning to move again with its damaged leg. He thought of their clicks of greeting when they saw him, the way they trusted him completely. "Yes," Jake said, "I would." The Admiralty office erupted into debate over the next 2 weeks. Some said it was a trap. They were setting up a human hostage situation. Some said it was political suicide, admitting that a single human could accomplish more through kindness than the entire military had accomplished through diplomacy. But the political reality was clear. They had made an offer that offered everything humanity wanted: peace in Sector 7, open trade, cooperation instead of constant military readiness, and the price was just one human who had chosen his own path. The Admiralty, faced with facts it could not deny and pressure it could not resist, approved the transfer. Jake would be discharged from military service with full honors. He would be given civilian status. He would be transported to space as a freelance civilian caregiver. But before Jake could leave, before the final paperwork could be signed, something unexpected happened. The news broke to the human public. Reports of the young, reports of Jake's choice to save them, reports of the unprecedented peace offer. The story spread through every human colony, every station, every ship, and the reaction was overwhelming. Messages poured in. Some were angry, saying Jake was a traitor, but most of them were not. Most of the messages were from people saying that what Jake had done was right, that he had proven something important about humanity, that they were proud of him. Jake's own family reached out. His mother called, tears streaming down her face, begging him not to go. His father called and told him he understood, though the understanding clearly cost him something. His sister sent a message that simply said, "Be happy. That is all that matters." On the day of his departure, Jake stood in the transport bay of Station 12. He wore a simple civilian suit. He carried minimal possessions, and as the ship began its final sequence to launch toward space, he watched Station 12 recede behind him. He was leaving everything: his career, his home, his species' territory, all for three young who needed him and a commander who had seen something in his actions worth changing her entire civilization for. The news networks broadcast his departure. Across human space, people watched as the civilian transport ship jumped through the portal that led to space. Most of them would never know what happened after that moment, but they knew that Jake had chosen something that most humans would consider insane. He had chosen love over duty. He had chosen compassion over security. He had chosen to trust that kindness could build bridges where diplomacy had failed. And in the darkness of space, that choice was about to change everything. The settlement was nothing like Jake had expected. He had imagined a cold, industrial place, hard and efficient and lifeless. Instead, what he found was almost beautiful in its own strange way. The colony was built inside a massive crystal formation, the natural structure carved and expanded into livable spaces. Light refracted through the crystal walls in 1,000 different colors. The air was cool and dry, exactly right for physiology. The three young ones had bounded ahead of Jake the moment they saw the colony, their clicks of excitement bouncing off the crystal walls. But they had stopped running when they realized Jake was not keeping pace. They had turned around and come back to him, crowding against his legs, their excitement turning to concern. They wanted him there. They needed him close. This was the reality Jake had chosen to accept. Commander Lyra stood at the entrance of the central chamber, waiting for them. She was larger now, Jake thought. Or perhaps it was just that he was seeing her with new eyes. Her shell was covered with marks and symbols that told the history of her achievements. She had led military campaigns. She had conquered rival colonies. She had shaped society through force and will. And now she was watching three young ones press themselves against a human, depending entirely on his presence for their emotional stability. "The medical team has prepared quarters for you," the commander said. She did not use words like welcome or thank you. They did not seem to have such softness in their language, but there was something in her tone that suggested an understanding. "The young ones will be most comfortable in the cooler chambers. I have assigned personnel to maintain the environmental controls." "Thank you," Jake said, then he corrected himself. "I mean, I understand. I will learn your systems." Commander Lyra tilted her head slightly. It was a gesture the three young ones often made when they were curious about something. "You will be expected to care for my offspring. You will also participate in educational programs. I want others to understand what you have shown my young ones, what you have shown me." "What have I shown them?" Jake asked. The commander was silent for a long time. The three young ones had begun playing around Jake's legs, their initial excitement returning now that they were in the familiar space of their colony. "That kindness is not weakness," Commander Lyra said finally. "That the lives of others matter even when they do not benefit you. My offspring have learned things from you that no teacher could have taught them. They learned to trust despite danger. They learned to receive care without expecting anything in return. These are concepts that are not natural to our species." "They are natural to mine," Jake said, "or at least they should be." The commander made a sound that might have been laughter. "Yet your superiors questioned your choice. Your own species almost prevented you from coming. This is unusual." "My species is learning," Jake said, "just like your species is learning." Over the following weeks, Jake fell into a routine. He cared for the three young ones. They grew stronger and faster. The smallest one's missing leg no longer bothered it at all, having been fitted with a prosthetic device that the medical team had created. But the bond between Jake and the young ones only grew deeper. They would not sleep unless he was in the chamber with them. They would not eat properly unless he showed them the food was safe by tasting it first, even though he could not actually eat their food. When Jake tried to spend time away from them, learning languages and customs, they would become distressed. Their clicking would turn sharp and painful. Guards would come to find him and bring him back. Eventually, Jake stopped trying to separate himself from them. He began working with other young, teaching them about human history and culture. He taught them about kindness and compassion. Some of the older resisted this. They saw it as weakness, as a contamination of pure thinking. But the young ones learned quickly, and they brought what they learned home to their families. The commander watched this process. She observed from a distance as her offspring and the young from the colony slowly changed their understanding of what it meant to be a sapient being. She never interrupted. She never criticized. She simply allowed it to happen. Then, 3 months after Jake's arrival, Commander Lyra requested a private meeting with him. They stood in a chamber high in the crystal spire, looking out over the entire colony. Below them, workers moved about their tasks. Hundreds of them, thousands, all living their lives in ways that had not changed for generations. "I have received communications from the Human Admiralty," the commander said. "They want you to return to human space for a formal treaty ceremony. They want to honor your choice publicly. They want you to be the symbol of peace between our species." Jake felt something heavy settle in his chest. He looked back toward the chamber where the 3 young ones were sleeping. They would be waking soon, looking for him. "What do you want?" Jake asked. The commander turned to look at him directly. Her dark eyes studied him with an intensity that made Jake understand why she commanded respect. "What you choose is your decision. You are no longer military. You are free, but I will speak truth. My offspring do not sleep when you are away. The young ones of the colony stop learning when you are absent. My species is changing because of your presence here, If you leave, even for a short time, I fear the changes will stop. I fear my people will return to the old ways." "You could order me to stay," Jake said. "You are the commander." "I could," Commander Lyra agreed. "But that would contradict everything you have taught us about choice and freedom. I will not order you. I will only ask. I will only say that my offspring need you. My people need you. Your presence here matters in ways that your presence in human space does not." Jake thought about his family. His mother still grieving. His father trying to understand his son's choice. His sister, the only one who had truly supported him. He thought about the Admiralty wanting to use him as a symbol. He thought about human society wanting to celebrate his choice. Then he thought about the smallest young one, dragging itself on 3 legs when he first found it. He thought about its clicks of joy when it saw him now, running on all 4 legs perfectly well. He thought about the way all 3 of them trusted him completely, without question, without reservation. "Tell the Admiralty I am staying," Jake said. "Tell them I chose this path because it was right, not for peace treaties or political advantage, for them. For 3 young ones who learned that kindness is real." Commander Lyra made that sound again, the one that might have been laughter. "The 3 young ones and my entire species, but I understand what you mean." "Will your people accept this?" Jake asked. "Will they accept that I chose to stay?" "They will accept it because I accept it," the commander said simply. "And because my offspring are happy. Among my species, the happiness of the young is the highest value. Everything else serves that purpose." Jake watched as the commander turned and left him alone in the crystal chamber. Below, the colony continued its work. The sun was setting, turning the crystal spires gold and red. And in that moment, Jake understood that he had made the right choice, not because it was noble or historical or important to human relations. He had made the right choice because 3 young depended on him. And that, it turned out, was reason enough for anything. 5 years had passed since Jake walked into the colony for the first time. The 3 young ones were not young anymore. They had grown to nearly the size of adult, their shells darkening to the deep purple that marked their species' maturity. The smallest one, who had dragged itself on 3 legs in a broken ship, moved now with strength and confidence. No one looking at it would see anything but a perfect. But the 3 of them still sought out Jake before they did anything important. They still slept near him when they were troubled. They still clicked their greeting when they saw him, a sound that had become as familiar to Jake as the beating of his own heart. The colony had changed too. Where once there had been only military efficiency and the cold logic of survival, there was now something different. Young gathered in the learning chambers where Jake taught them about human history and culture. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to. They asked questions. They debated. Some of them even laughed, a clicking sound that the older said had not been heard in their colonies for generations. Commander Lyra had expanded her teaching program. She had selected promising young and assigned them to work with Jake, learning the philosophy of compassion and cooperation. Some had resisted at first. The older military officers had complained that this was weakness. But as the young integrated back into the colony with new perspectives and new ways of thinking, something shifted. The colony became less brutal. The military operations became less destructive. Progress was slow, but it was real. And then the ceremony came. 5 years, a full cycle of the calendar. The commander declared it a celebration of the human who had changed her people. The entire colony gathered in the great crystal chamber, thousands of clicking and chirping in a sound like wind through metal. Jake stood uncomfortable in their midst, wearing the ceremonial robes they had given him, wishing he could simply disappear. But the 3 young ones stood beside him, their bodies close to his, showing everyone that they claimed him as their own. Commander Lyra entered the chamber, and the clicking fell silent. She moved with the authority of someone who had led her species through war and politics, and now through transformation. She came to stand before Jake, the 3 young ones stepping back slightly to give them space. 5 years ago, the commander said, her voice carrying through the crystal amplifiers so that every in the colony could hear. "I was brought to a place I did not expect. A human, a member of a species we had classified as lesser, had saved my offspring from certain death. He had risked everything. He had asked for nothing." The chamber was completely silent. "I came to understand something that should have been obvious but was not," Commander Lyra continued. "That compassion does not measure itself by species or genetic similarity. That kindness is not weakness. That the measure of a being is not their power or their weapons or their ability to destroy. The measure is their willingness to protect, to care, to sacrifice for others." She turned to face Jake directly. "Jake, you came to us as an outsider, but you are outsider no longer. My offspring claim you as family. My colony recognizes you as a teacher and guide. My species acknowledges you as a voice that changed our understanding of what it means to be alive." Then the commander did something that Jake had never seen another do. She extended one of her long arms and pressed it gently against Jake's chest. It was a gesture of profound respect. In the language, according to everything Jake had learned, it was a gesture of absolute trust and honor. The three young ones clicked loudly. The sound spread through the chamber. Other young joined in, and then others, and then the entire colony was filled with the sound of approval and acceptance. Jake felt something break inside him, not in pain but in release. 5 years of being an outsider, 5 years of being the only human in a world, 5 years of trying to be strong enough, brave enough, good enough to deserve this place. And now, in this moment, he was accepted. After the ceremony, there was a gathering, brought food from the cultivation chambers. They shared stories of what had changed in the colony. Young came to Jake and thanked him for teaching them. Some of them brought their own offspring, showing them the human, saying, "This being saved our leaders when they were young. This being teaches us that compassion is strength." The three young ones never left Jake's side. They sat close to him, their shells touching his body, showing everyone that he belonged to them and they belonged to him. The smallest one, in a gesture that would have been impossible 5 years ago, draped one of its long arms across Jake's shoulder. "I have a new role for you," Commander Lyra said when the gathering had ended and most of the colony had dispersed. She was sitting across from Jake in her private chamber, the three young ones sleeping in a corner, finally satisfied enough with his presence to rest. "I want you to travel to other colonies. I want you to teach them what you have taught us. I want you to show them that change is possible, that our species can be more than we have been." "I thought you would not let me leave," Jake said. "You said you needed me here." "We do," the commander replied. "But I have learned from you that the greatest need is sometimes not the selfish one. My offspring have bonds with you, yes, but they have also learned independence. They have learned to live without you by their side, knowing that you will return. That is a kind of love you taught us." Jake understood what the commander was offering. He was no longer a prisoner of compassion. He was no longer bound by the dependence of three young ones. He had choices now. "I will do this," Jake said, "for a time, but I will return here to them." "I know you will," Commander Lyra said, "because you have learned what my species never knew, that home is not a place or a species or a responsibility. Home is the beings who love you without condition." Over the next years, Jake became a legend in space. He traveled to 17 colonies, teaching young about compassion and connection. He gave speeches about what he had learned from the three young ones. He wrote about human relations and the possibilities of peace. But he always returned to Commander Lyra's colony. He always returned to the three young ones who had become his reason for living. Decades passed. The three young ones became adults and then elders. Their shells turned darker and more marked with the symbols of their achievements. They had become leaders in their own right, bringing the lessons of compassion to every decision they made. And Jake, who had once been a captain in the human military, became known as the being who had taught that strength and kindness were not opposites, that love could bridge any gulf. On his final day, sitting with the three young ones around him. Now ancient by human standards, though his was eternally middle-aged, Jake understood the meaning of his life. He had not achieved great military victories. He had not discovered new worlds or reshaped galactic politics. He had simply protected those who needed protecting. He had shown love when love was not expected. He had chosen compassion when power would have been easier. And in doing so, he had changed everything. Commander Lyra, ancient herself now, came to sit beside him. She said nothing. She simply pressed her arm against his chest, the gesture of absolute trust that she had given him 5 years into his stay and would give him for the rest of their lives. "Thank you," Jake whispered, knowing she understood. The three young ones, no longer young, no longer needing him for survival but needing him for identity, gathered close. The smallest one, whose leg he had once bandaged in a broken ship, rested its head against his shoulder. And in that moment, Jake knew that he had never made a better choice than the day he decided not to let 3 frightened aliens die. That choice had given him a family among the stars. It had given him purpose. It had given him home. It had given him everything.